Welcome back to the channel. There's a new airline potentially on the cards that would have a lot of people's eyebrows raising, developments over at KLM as they continue to transform their business, and lastly, some positive developments at SAS. Let me begin with that new prospective airline, and months after we saw Bonza unfortunately collapse, and only a handful of weeks after Rex entered voluntary administration, Australia could have a new airline on the cards. Koala Airlines, the Melbourne-based startup company whose name highlights, of course, one of Australia's most iconic animals, has emerged in the past week with much skepticism and question marks about its ambitions. The prospective carrier states that it has been looking to create a fresh approach to aviation, focused on providing a strong customer experience. What that is, that's not been stipulated. Generally, Koala Airlines will focus on domestic flying and hopes to acquire 737 MAX jets from Boeing if possible. These planes will act as the backbone of its fleet. However, the entry into the market, specifically I'm talking the domestic market, is slated to be something different from previous attempts undertaken in, say, the last few decades by airlines that have come and gone. Koala Airlines says it wants to carve out a unique niche in flying that enhances the industry without disrupting existing standards. That's all really we know. Furthermore, it looks to break the mold that has seen many low-cost units come in and fail since 1990. As they were focusing on only offering cheaper fares and facing competition at what would be an unsustainable level. Notably, the launch of Koala Airlines follows a rebrand from Desert Air, which was acquired and founded in 1970 with the ambition to offer air tours and charter flights across the Pacific Islands and Australia. Based in Melbourne, Koala Airlines is led by Bill Astling, who has 45 years of experience in aviation and tourism. However, rightfully so, including probably from me too, there's a lot of skepticism for what this new endeavour will entail, with so many more questions than answers, and likely to remain that way. Koala Airlines says on their website that they're finalising negotiations with suppliers to have a fleet of aircraft that will enable its Air Operators Certificate, or AOC, to be upgraded to match the new aircraft type it is taking on. However, if Koala Airlines can ever launch, it will face considerable competition, incredibly high costs, and substantial capital requirements to really get it off the ground. Being based in Melbourne, you also have to remember that competition will come from the likes of the Qantas Group, with not just the mainline Qantas, but also the low-cost division of Jetstar. Moreover, there's also Virgin Australia, and across the Tasman, Air New Zealand, all to consider. These are major carriers within the industry that have always proved difficult to dethrone. For example, Bonza struggled for many reasons, but we know they aimed at flying to underserved or unserved markets. This was them attempting their own means of carving a niche, and not competing with Qantas, Jetstar, and Virgin, and look what's unfortunately happened there. Koala Airlines will face an uphill battle to launch, and I'd argue that there's probably 99.9% of doubt, but it is interesting to say the very least, considering they are based in Melbourne, Australia, which is my personal home. I'd love to hear your take down below in the comments. How serious do you actually feel this endeavour is, if at all? KLM, they're celebrating taking delivery of a new aircraft type, the A321neo, marking a pretty important milestone for this airline as it continues to transform its fleet. The A321neo that I speak of is part of an overarching commitment to being greener, more efficient, and consequently cleaner and quieter in day-to-day flying. KLM now says that following delivery of the plane to its home of Amsterdam Schiphol, the jet will follow a process before it can enter scheduled passenger operations. The carrier is targeting a mid-September entry into service, permitting that the next few weeks do go as smooth as possible, and the jet will be deployed to European destinations with the focus on Copenhagen, Berlin, and Stockholm first. This will form the first 3 initial locations, and following this, we'll see Paris, Prague, and Vienna. The deployment to the 3 latest cities will only be possible as more A321neos are delivered, with KLM expecting 3 more units before the year's end. This plane, it's going to play an integral role in not just future ops and growth, but also replacing the beloved 737 fleet, which, while has served KLM for a prolonged period, is certainly showing its signs of age and the maybe not so favourable conditions it has in comparison to more of your next-gen planes. The A321neo's capabilities from a capacity and spec standpoint are really just so much more advanced, something you'd expect, and it means it is the ideal replacement for future flying, with what KLM says to be high comfort levels. The difference between the two is further highlighted when you consider the A321neo is 21% more fuel efficient than the 737 when measured by passenger ton per kilometre. Inside the A321neo, KLM has equipped the plane with as many as the latest technologies that it can, and it believes this aircraft will be fantastic for future flying. And another important consideration is the noise footprint, which at the present will be half of the 737. This goes on to have a very positive impact on residents that may be located along flight paths of not just Amsterdam Schiphol, but also generally the airports that it will go on to serve. KLM will be replacing the 737s with the aforementioned Airbus single-aisle family, and not to forget as well, the E2 model will replace existing and aging Embraer planes. As for your wide-body fleet, well, you'll see the 787 Dreamliner very soon complemented with the introduction of the A350. On to the final story, and Scandinavian Airlines, or just more simply SAS, has successfully ended a cabin crew strike that threatened to impact its operations for the long term, only coming to a close thanks to an ability to reach a new agreement with its employees. Workers have now formally called off strike action, but before that, we saw many cancellations across the business. Overall, though, this latest deal is a vote of confidence for the continued rebuilding of this airline that has struggled so greatly in recent times. Some 155 cabin crew members were involved in the strike action, and they basically sought better working conditions, a common theme among many other professions within the industry and right around the world. While strike action for the foreseeable future has been avoided, it doesn't mean all is, say, mended. SAS states there's still a lot of work to do to return the business to the typical standard that would be present as it rebuilds from the many cancelled flights, and now the need to deal with passengers that have been impacted. Raises will arrive for airline employees who were previously some of the lowest paying positions. The increases will be 7.5% for wages and other benefits, including more time off and longer breaks between flights. SAS will now eliminate strike action, and after rectifying the contracts, it will bump up their monthly expenses and certainly be reflected in their quarterly results. But they know they need to now navigate these higher operating costs, and those higher operating costs are not something that's been foreign to our industry in the last, say, 18 to 24 months, as many other airlines have been given no choice but to enter into new contracts with employee groups, facing pressures from unions, prospective strike action, and more. And all of this has meant that your wages and bonuses have all bumped up the costs for each airline. Despite these costs, it is positive for SAS. They know they can now finally move forward in the future in a more stable manner and really focus on finalising the restructuring process. As you may recall, in the past, they entered voluntary administration. That's going to conclude today's aviation news recap. Thank you very much for your support here on the channel. It is certainly appreciated. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you tomorrow for your next recap.
And we'll fly.